Dakle, vi hrabri ljudi i pametni ljudi koji su odlučili poslušati nešto o millennialsima, pričamo cijelo vrijeme o njima, pa rekli smo da ćemo čuti što oni u stvari žele. S nama je danas s nama Gabrielle Jackson i izgradila je karijeru na temi millennialsa, tako da će sigurno biti zanimljivo poslušati šta nam ona ima reći. She's millennial also, so she will know what millennials want. So Gabrielle, please.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. Based on my accent, you can tell that I'm from Zagreb. Just kidding, I'm from the United States. And I just want to hear a little bit of show of hands just to have a little bit of participation so I can figure out who all of you are and what your interaction is with this millennial generation. So we're going to start off. Everybody raise your hand. Everybody. Lower your hand if this applies to you. You manage millennials. Lower your hand. Okay, most people. You work with millennials. Maybe you have millennials on a team with you. Lower your hand. You have millennials in your family. You know a millennial. Put your hand down. So no one's hands are raised. Okay, then this applies to absolutely everyone in here. This presentation is on who the millennial generation is. Who are we? What are we? Why are we? And we're going to better understand at the end some practical takeaways for those of you who actually are interacting with millennials, which in fact is every single person in this room, about how you can better engage with this next generation. So each of us have these moments in time where we come of age, right? Where we become a man or we become a woman, right? Think back at that time in your life where maybe you realized that you were finally an adult. Maybe it was when you finally left the house or, finally started a family of your own or, went to college, where you had that moment where you said, I'm an adult. Maybe some of you are trying to think very hard because you haven't had that moment yet. Don't worry, it will come. I remember mine happened just a few years ago, and I remember I was speaking at a university in the States, and 3 words passed my mouth, and I said, standing there in a crowd much like this, and I just looked at these kids, and I said, kids these days, right? Instantly, I saw that the next generation coming up was different than my generation, and I distanced myself. And we find that we're constantly changing, differentiating ourselves from the generation that comes after us. One of my favorite quotes is by a man named Hugo Mann, and he says, we often criticize the next generation as if we had nothing to do with creating them. So keep this in mind as we're going to be going over very briefly who the different generations are at work, and then really delving into who the millennial generation is. But I want to be very clear about my agenda straight off. I am not here to tell you that millennials are the best generation on the planet. I'm not even going to tell you that you should hire more millennials. But my agenda is this: to better understand the next generation. I'm going to give you 3 different choices about how you can engage with millennials and your reaction to what you can actually do with this next generation. It's completely up to you. But then I also want to empower you with very practical action steps of what you can do in your family, in your office, and in your communities as well. So let's jump on in, shall we? That's me, Gabrielle Jackson. Moving on. So who are the 4 different generations that we're working with right now? It's very interesting because there are 3 and yes, even 4 different generations at work. Unlike any other time in history where we're experiencing this culture clash of different age groups working together. Why is that? Well, we've got an incredibly educated, very ambitious, large generation, which is the millennial generation, walking into the workforce. Then we've got 2 generations kind of in the middle. We've got the Xers, we've got what are also called boomers, a very, very large generation. And then we have what are called the traditionalists, or sometimes called the builders, who are not retiring nearly as quickly as other generations had before. So look at it like this. It's kind of like a funnel, right? So we've got millennials who, in the EU, there's 50.5 million millennials coming into the workforce, right? And then we've got Xers, which are the smallest generation on the planet, Then we've got boomers, which are about 45 million, and then we've got traditionalists who are still kind of on the edge. And so we've got everybody kind of packed together, competing for the same jobs, the same housing, the same opportunity. Probably why traffic is so bad sometimes. So what actually goes into what defines a generation? What defines someone's work ethic? This is fascinating. So Pew Research is based in Washington, D.C., where I live. I work with them quite a bit. And what they found was they studied different generations, and they asked this very simple question. They said, what defines your generation from the generation that came before you and the generation that comes behind you? Interestingly enough, 3 of the 4 generations said one word, really 2, work ethic. Can you believe what the only generation was that did not say work ethic defined them? The millennial generation. That was the one thing that differentiated. They said, no, our work ethic doesn't define us. It's not better than the generations that are around us. And we're going to find a little bit more about why that is. So what actually defines someone's work ethic? Yes, we're going to be talking about generations because that's a really big way that people are impacted. But there are other things as well which we're not necessarily going to touch on because we've already been hearing a lot about that today. If you've been in any of the lectures beforehand, if you've been in Kuhn's lecture or Olga's earlier, you learned more about how to engage employees across the board, how to build teams, how to inspire people, how to not necessarily give them more money, but how to motivate them from within. So we're not going to touch about that. But keep in mind there are multiple factors that play a key role here. Many of them including family, where they're from, geography, right? We know even more so within communities as well as countries. I do a lot of my work in the United States, but what we find is, interestingly enough, a lot of these trends are really spanning across the globe because we're becoming a very global culture. You're probably sitting there thinking, what in the world could this American girl have to say about millennials in my community, in my hometown? But I'll tell you, with all the research that I've done, and I've done a significant amount, I work with universities and major research organizations to really conduct high-level research about who this next generation is, and it's fascinating to find that there are more and more trends which link millennials across continents than we've ever seen before. Why is that? There's really 2 things. First is we're constantly connected, right? We are a part of a generation that we're also called digital natives, if any of you have heard of that. Many of us are called digital natives because we grew up with the internet being a part of who we are. And then secondly, we've really been able to use that platform to springboard into creating a collective identity as a generation. And that is why we're starting to see themes where you're connecting with the millennial. I've had a chance to talk to a number of you who do work with millennials and learning we actually have more in common than we don't. Next, we've got gender. Education, someone's education experience is of course going to influence what they think about work. Interestingly enough, if you are looking to connect with millennials, consider the education system that they came from, because that is how they have been taught how to learn. So when you're looking to engage with millennials, realize the education system that they came up with. Look at how it was similar, or look how it was different from your own experience, and play to that so that you can relate in a language that's similar to them. And finally, their actual work experience. So, brief overview so we know that we're all on the same page here. Who are the different generations at work? Now, generations is a fairly blurry term, right? Generations are usually between 20 and 25 years. And generations are defined by clusters of people, usually by self-defining events. So sociologists determine what is an actual generation based off of the major life events going on in their communities, in their families, when individuals are coming of age. So what do I mean by coming of age? Those are events that happen between the ages of 13 and 24 years old. So think about that in your own life. Those major life, maybe world or nationwide events that were happening, and those experiences help define you, to help define your collective experience with your cohorts and your colleagues. So who is it that we're talking about that's still working right now? Traditionalists, they're also called the builder generation. They're also called the silent generation. They're born between 1925 and 1945. Next, we've got the boomer generation, which used to be, until 4 years ago, the largest generation on the planet, and those are born between 1946 and 1964. Then we've got the Xer generation, which is the smallest generation on the planet. What means Xers? Yes, it's just a term, Generation X, if any of you have heard of it. It's just a term that is the generation, what sociologists have called. It was just kind of like Generation X stood for whatever it needed to stand for, and became like a very trendy thing to say that you are part of Generation X. Good question. Millennials are born between 1981 and the year 2000. It's fun for me to talk to many people because so many, maybe even some people in this room, didn't know they were actually millennials, right? Is that surprising to any of you, saying like, I'm not a millennial? It's a much larger generation than many people take account for. And we're starting to see that there's even divisions between the millennial generation and how they actually relate. So let's dive into what is meant by being a millennial. What does it mean? We've already discussed the actual age bracket, which is between 1981 and the year 2000. But what we find is this next generation is distinctively different in a couple of different defining factors, and we're going to jump into that right now. By the way, if you have questions, thank you very much for asking that point of clarification. This is completely interactive. We have just a short 45 minutes together, and I want to provide as much feedback, insight, advice. If you have examples, if you want to argue with me about something, if you have something very pressing that you want to ask, please ask me, because you don't know when the next time you're going to have a millennial expert actually in front of you. So please take advantage of this time. Who are the millennial generation? What are their priorities at work? So this might surprise you, it might not surprise you, that millennials love multitasking, right? If you walk by any millennial's desk, oftentimes how many different windows do they have open on their computer, right? Like no less than 5. Because we have to do everything all at the same time or we're not being productive, right? We have to be listening to music, and we have to be typing an email and maybe filling out a form or responding to someone so that we're therefore more productive. But it's a fallacy, and maybe some of you who are not millennials also fall into this, thinking that you can be more productive by doing more. But for those of you who manage millennials, help millennials understand that multitasking isn't doing many things at the same time. It's doing many things done well. And so help them focus one thing at a time rather than taking a very broad-based approach. Because when we start to study the human mind, we realize that as humans, we literally cannot multitask. I know this is shocking for some of you. You all look terrified, right? You cannot actually multitask because the synapses in your brain cannot fire fast enough for you to be able to actually process multiple things at once. So as a society, we've been taught, do as much as you can, as quickly as you can, but what we're finding is productivity is actually going down. So for those of you managers who are with millennials or non-millennials, keep that in mind. Next, mission-oriented. Millennials want to know what they do makes a difference, not just in the world out there, but in the company as well. We're finding that millennials really want to know what they do today actually makes a difference in the bottom line. They want to know that if they don't show up for work tomorrow, someone's going to notice, right? Because although millennials are the largest generation on the planet, we're also terrified of one thing, and that is that we are just like everybody else. And so keep in mind that millennials want to know that they are uniquely appreciated, seen, and they contribute in a very unique and amazing way to the overall goal of the organization as well. Millennials also care about fulfillment. Now, I don't know about you, but I have yet to meet anybody who does not want to be fulfilled at work, right? Someone who's like, I really want to be really miserable, right? If any of you are like that, like, I really want to hate my job. No one in this room, right? It doesn't matter how old you are. No one wants to not be happy at work. But what's unique about millennials is they're walking in the front door, and on day one, no, in the interview, they're asking asking more about work-life balance, and they want to know, when they're going to get a raise, and they want to know, what it looks like to have a vacation policy. They want to know these things on day one. So keep in mind that millennials want to feel fulfilled, and they're going to be voicing it a lot more. It's your opportunity as the manager to help them understand what having a fulfilled work-life integration, not just work-life balance, actually is. Next, we're looking at communication preferences. Now, I'm sure that surprises all of you that millennials prefer to text, right? How many of you are parents to millennials? A couple of you have, and how many of you actually text? We were talking a little bit about WhatsApp. Everybody uses WhatsApp, right? Now, I remember the day that I taught my mother to text. It was the best and worst day of my life. She used to call me on the phone and want to talk all the time, and then I'd say, Mom, I don't have time, and so she would email me. But there were like very, very long emails, like short books, more like, and it would take me a very long time to actually read through this email. And so I said, Mom, I don't have time, I appreciate it, just text me. So she would take the email and put it into a text message, and so I pull up my phone, I'm like scrolling for like 25 minutes, and I'm like, Mom, I don't, and so I just pick up the phone, and I just call her. And I remember she would get frustrated because she said, Gabrielle, you asked me to text. I am now texting. Now you're calling me. And I said, it's okay. You tried very hard. I really appreciate it, right? Because as a generation, those of you who are seeing the preferences for communication for the following generation, it's your responsibility as the leader, whether you're the parent or the manager or the boss, to bridge that gap and step over and look to build bonds with that younger generation. But let me be clear here, that does not mean that you only need to bend over to help millennials up and not expect them to grow up. The reality is that when you do that, they see that as a huge sign of respect, and they will respond and show you more respect and want to build those relationships as well. Because many millennials are walking into a work world and they're intimidated and they haven't been experiencing any sort of professional work world like they have now. And so by you showing that you care enough about them to communicate shows a very high sign of respect for them. Relationship to authority is very interesting. I work a lot with companies all over the world, and I work a lot in the U.S. with the government as well as with the U.S. Navy. And it's fascinating to me because we're able to see how millennials have a very different view of respect. For those of you who are slightly older, you might think of them as disrespectful. You might, if any of you have said this, millennials are so rude, right? They're so disrespectful. They don't know how to act professional. I can't trust them to go into a professional setting because their emails are short, or they don't know how to be like an adult and I can't trust them, right? Millennials have been growing up in a very flat work structure where we really appreciate flat hierarchies. We do not want to know about bureaucracy. We don't want to know about process. Technology has changed very much of this because now we don't have gatekeepers of knowledge. Maybe 10 or 20 years ago you had one person and you need to go talk to that one person to get to someone who's higher up, right? Maybe to get to the head of a company or, a government official. Now you can just tweet at that person, right? Or you can just email someone, or you can find a way around. Because of technology, we're empowered with the skills that we need to jump to higher levels of authority and leadership that we might not have had before. And so because of that, and because many millennials have very good relationships with their parents, sometimes too good of relationships, right? They're now saying, well, why can't I just, act like my boss is my friend, right? Where they're going in and they're calling their boss by their first name when it really should be something more formal. So they're not understanding that in your eyes, there's a process and it took something to be there, right? You needed to go through the hard steps to get to where you are because you earned that position. We're going to be talking about in a little bit how millennials don't see things that way. We want things faster, and we're constantly asking why. Next, feedback. Yes, please.
Thanks. So I want to understand, is it like the same for everybody in the world who is millennial, all these categories and descriptions that you are mentioning? Or, for example, in Asia, due to culture, or Japan, that we know
Yes.
that's a different culture, do they also do these things as in States, for example?
Thank you. Thank you very much for pointing that out, which I think is a very important highlight. And the answer is yes and no. Because it's not just, even within a similar culture, every person is different. Because when I listed those things that influence our work culture, or work ethic, I should say, it's, family and background and education. So these are very broad topics that we study because it's based off of collective data that we've included. But it's fascinating, to your point, we're actually finding a lot more consistency across generations, across countries when it comes to these types of things. But I'm glad that you pointed that out. We're going to have a graph that I'm going to be going over what the different areas are of the world and how there's consistency actually where their own priorities are. So thank you. That should incentivize the rest of you to start asking questions as well. So I'll get bored. All right. Feedback is incredibly important, right? Having instantaneous feedback. We now live in a society where there's instant likes and instant shares, and things go viral very quickly. And if you are working with a millennial and you're saying just wait for your 360 review in 9 months to 3 years, millennials are going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't wait that long, like I could die, right? Like millennials have such a short attention span when it comes to feedback because we're so used to that very instant culture that we're working in. So with millennials, when you're working with them, you want it to be much more interactive, right? You want to know how that person is doing. So for those of you who manage millennials or work with them, find ways to give casual feedback. Don't feel like you need to sit them down every single week and make long lists. They don't want that either. Walk out of a meeting, give them instant feedback. Say, these are 3 things that you did very well. Here's 1 thing you can improve on. Or that was great, but maybe next time, why don't you try this? Or I've done this in the past. Why don't you try this next time? That's the sort of feedback that millennials want. And millennials don't just want positive feedback, right? We don't just want a hug and told how great we are so we can keep on going. We actually really do want constructive feedback because we want to get better, because we want to work harder for you, which is one of the myths that we're going to be talking about in a few moments. Team dynamics. Millennials love working on teams. We have been trained to work on teams from a very young age. We love collaboration. We love growing. We love experiencing life together. We love being able to be challenged and learning from other people. We learn more from others than we learn from our managers or our bosses. And so when you're looking to develop multi-generational teams, which are the most powerful teams, keep in mind that millennials also want to work on teams because that's how we level the playing field as well. Many millennials don't want to be called out as being wrong. They don't want to be told, you didn't do this right, or that was very bad. So millennials don't want to mess up. So if you're part of a team, you can share the responsibility and share the experience as well. Also, too, multi-generational teams are so powerful because it couples the passion and the excitement of someone who's young with the wisdom and the experience of someone who's a little bit older. So don't just only put young people off to the side and ignore them. They want to be on your team as well. It's thinking about going. There we go. So we've been talking about millennials. But really, in the back of your mind, you're probably thinking, why should I care, right? Why is everyone so concerned about this next generation? Why does everyone keep talking about what are we going to do with millennials and everyone's freaking out? The reality is that millennials, yes, we are the largest generation on the planet right now, but we're also the largest consumer base. We're not just your employees of the next few years, we're your employees now, and we're going to continue to be the largest purchasing power in the world for the next 50 years. So we're going to be talking about a couple of different choices that you have with what you can do with millennials. Realizing also, too, that we're in a very unique situation right here, even in this part of the world. Here in Europe, we're actually experiencing more millennials leaving than are coming. So they're saying in the next 40 years, 30% of the workforce is going to leave. 30%, that's 1 out of nearly every 3 people who are not going to be working here anymore unless they are engaged. So we're at a very critical point right now where we can either keep them, engage them, harness that excitement and that power, and inspire them, or we're going to lose them. So really the future really hinges on these next 5 years of what are we going to do with this next generation. Next, we've also got a huge flood of millennials walking into the workforce, and we've got another generation that is sticking right here. They're not going anywhere. So for every 1.5 millennials who are entering the workforce, 1 boomer reaches retirement age. But what we're finding is that that boomers aren't retiring. They're not leaving. Because either they can't afford to retire and kind of sail off and enjoy their retirement ages, or they enjoy their work, or that's just not what they've decided to do. They still want to stay in their company. So we've got this huge influx of young people and people who are have more experience pushed all together all at the same time. Third, here's an extra for you. Why you need to actually care about millennials is because they're your customers. They're the ones who are going to be purchasing from you. And if you can't relate to them, they're going to find someone else, or they're going to invent it themselves. So looking at who this next generation is, being able to understand them is the first and most important thing that you can begin to do today to better create a world for you and your company in the future. So I'm going to give you 3 choices at the end of this presentation. 3 choices of what you can actually do with millennials, and for you to think about as we go through all of these. The first is you can either ignore them, pretend that they're not there. You can either, have them with you, but just expect them to work just like you did. You figured it out, right? Why can't they just figure it out? Second is you can tolerate them. Kind of sit there with gritted teeth and just kind of think, well, eventually it's going to get a little bit better, right? Maybe if I just tolerate them for the next 5 to 10 years, they'll finally grow up and stop being so annoying, and then we can move on from there. Or the third option is that you can engage them. You can inspire them. You can take a step towards them and see the positive results that could happen from it. Now, I want to take a few moments and have you practice a little bit of an exercise of what you would do with a millennial. So here's an experience, okay? Here's an example. Is everybody listening? We're all listening. Okay. You're going to need to get in small groups after this, so pay attention. So, everybody kind of snickers a little bit. That's good. So, here's an example. You are a manager, and you have just been given an assignment. It's due tomorrow at 9 a.m., but you need to give it to your millennial. It's 6 o'clock p.m., and that millennial has tickets to their favorite concert. You walk into the millennial's office, and you say, hey, I need to get this done by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Can you get it done for me? The millennial's like, I have a concert that I need to go to. My best friend just flew in from out of town. It's a very expensive concert. And you're like, I got to get this done by 9 a.m. Take a few moments and talk to the person next to you. What would you do in that situation as the manager? How would you handle that millennial? Ready? Go. What would you do? Yes. 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 So he's insisting. I know, I'm gonna have to. Did you ask earlier? Yes. Yes.
Do you have a presentation where you told the Millennium guys how to do with Xers?
Yes, I do actually. So I split my time between the two. Half of my time I spend with older generations, helping them understand who this next generation is. And then the other half of my time I spend with millennials. And I'll tell you, I'm pretty tough on the millennials because it's easier having it come from me rather than having it come from somewhat of another generation, because I realize the challenges that many millennials face. So I go through and I speak very much at universities, but also to companies have me come in and train their millennials on how to bridge the gap, right? One of the big things is, like I talked about, is respect, but also with communication. So one thing I train millennials to do is I say, ask your direct manager how they want to be communicated with. Is it okay to email them? Is it okay to call? Or, can I SMS you? What's the best way to get a hold of you during certain times of day? If something important happens, if you're in a meeting. And it's something very simple, but something that millennials are not taught, because they're always, something in the back of many millennials' heads are, they'll just change for me. But it's a sign of respect for that young person to go to their direct manager and say, how can I best communicate with you, because I respect your time enough to know that when I speak to you that you're actually listening. So I split my time between the two. Good question. So how many of you fired your millennial? You're like, you're done. You're not going to the concert. You're not working here anymore. I get that a lot. I don't blame you, right? How many of you said, I would just do the work myself? Like, I can't rely on this millennial to get this work done by 9 a.m. I'm just going to do it myself. How many of you kind of tried to come up with a solution? Said maybe, okay, so share with us a little bit about what you decided.
We decided that we'd try the marshmallow experiment and in effect say, please do the work and miss out on this concert, and then we'll give you 2 concerts at a later stage.
Aha, give them 2 concerts later on. Okay. Did anybody else think about that? You did. Okay, what are some other, here, I'll take it, thank you. What are some other solutions that you came up with? Yes? I'll come back.
I would let that person go to concert, but
Yes.
Make an agreement that probably that person could do that job after the concert, because if it's so important, it's win-win situation in
Yes.
this case.
Good.
Otherwise, that person would be very disappointed and probably leave the company someday. Not because of that one, but it's one of the situations that drives you to and increases your dissatisfaction at work.
Yes, that's a very good point. Many millennials see time with their friends much like time with their family. So it's like, would it be different if it was a parent who had to go pick up their child from daycare, right? So many millennials see that as that very important. But I mean, your millennial would have to not be having too much fun at the concert. Yes.
We discussed here that we would approach it to say, definitely we can go to the concert, and we would chat actually what is, who is playing and, where's your friend coming from. So we would have a chat around that, and then we say, because it's critical that we need to complete, we suggest that, we meet in the office early and do the work together. And I think then, it's a win-win, and it really builds the relationship. And sure, it's gonna get paid back to the manager as well in various ways. So
Absolutely.
this is what we discussed.
Great. Very good. And then you guys back here, last one. Did you guys have something that you wanted to?
No, basically the same thing. We just wanted to say that.
Yes. He's an actual millennial, folks.
Yeah, we are the millennials. So
Listen to them.
yeah, we basically came to the same solution. We would let ourselves to go to the concert.
Oh, it's so
but,
nice of you. Good.
we'll do the job later, and it will be an agreement. Okay, after concert we'll do the job, but let us come to the office, for example, after 1 p.m. so we can sleep.
Yes. See, I'm hearing a lot of compromise in here, which I like. All right, let's hear it.
But maybe as a one option we didn't hear, maybe we can go to that person who gave us that kind of deadline and ask what kind of deadline is that? Now it's 6 p.m. You're giving me a deadline tomorrow 9 a.m.
Yeah?
So
Look at that. Are you sure you're not a millennial? Challenging authority. You all passed. Congratulations. All right, so now we're going to jump into what are the 5 myths that you probably don't even know that you believe about millennials. And it's going to be really quick. And a lot of it is based off of my book, 5 Millennial Myths, which is going to be available for purchase afterwards as well as this evening. But it's based off of the research that I've done, both primary research where I work actually in focus groups across industries to learn from millennials themselves what are the challenges they're experiencing. And then I also work across industries from banking to the automotive industry to finance to be able to better understand what are these ideas that are going on in our head about who this next generation actually is. Has anyone ever called a millennial entitled? Right? Like they're very bratty, they think that they know it all, they think that they want a raise just for existing, and they just kind of show up and expect so much. I've had millennials in job interviews ask, when they're going to get a raise, and we're like, you're not hired yet. I'm not going to give you a raise until you actually take on the job. But many millennials come in with this idea of what work is. And much of that is because of media, where we have this kind of glamorized view or idea of what actual work looks like. And then we get into the work world and we're like, that's not what it looked like on TV. This is not nearly as fun. Like, this isn't sexy. Like, this is not fun. Hard work is hard work. And so understanding that many millennials haven't been exposed to real life work situations like maybe you did when you were younger. And so finding an understanding of why millennials have this idea that they can, walk into a work world and then have more experience or more exposure at a younger age. But what I found is what comes across as entitled, and I'm not arguing, I believe millennials really are entitled because I think many of us do think that we can do so much. But I think that that's actually a positive for you and your company because really entitlement is really ambition misdirected. By that I mean many millennials, not all, but many millennials do want to be a part of something. We want to participate. We want to be a part of the team. We want our voice to be heard. The challenge is many of us don't necessarily know how to do that, but we're ambitious. We have these ideas about what our life should look like. It's interesting, I wrote an article not very long ago and I said, millennials are experiencing a quarter life crisis. So if any of you are familiar with the midlife crisis, right, where you turn 45 or 50 and you're like, I got to get a hot girlfriend and a sports car, and then I've really made it. But we're seeing that with millennials as they're hitting 25, and they're saying, this isn't the life that I wanted. And they're starting to freak out a little bit, like, this isn't the job that I wanted. I don't have the boyfriend like I wanted. I don't have the house that I want. I don't have, I haven't traveled as much as I've wanted. And so they're starting to shut down. So realizing that millennials are kind of thinking about this, they've got these ideas, so you can then bridge that gap. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you actually do that. The next myth, this is actually interesting. So this is a study that the Harvard Business Review did internationally based off of what different nations really thought about, what each generation across really the globe believed about what were some major priorities at work. But this is interesting because they found here that why millennials want to be leaders, right? So many of them will volunteer for positions of leadership that they're not really ready for. But what we find here in Europe, interestingly enough, unlike other parts of the world, I should say, they said high future earnings were one of the top reasons that they wanted to be promoted to a manager. Then it was to influence the organization. And then it kind of goes on from there, and it's, having their voice be heard and making a positive change. But knowing that millennials realize that to get ahead and to make more money, they need to be a manager, that's an important incentive to be able to put in front of them and explain to them the process that it takes to actually become a manager. The next myth is that millennials are independent. And by that, I mean that they don't want to work with anybody who doesn't look like them or act like them. And I get that a lot. Many times I walk into a company and they say, yes, we've got lots of millennials. Let me show you. And they I follow them, and there's like 5 of them. And they're like grouped in a little corner. And it's like a kiddie table, right? Like they're like all very young people. And I say, oh, that's very nice of you. You gave them their own table. It's like, yes, and sometimes we ask their opinions on things. I mean, we don't listen to them, but like we're very incorporated here. And it's funny, but it's very sad because millennials don't want to be seen as something that's different or something that they're not a part of the team, because the reality is, as I've been discussing before, millennials really want to build relationships with those of other generations. And it's interesting, one of the top motivators for millennials to stick around at a job is mentoring. The relationship that they have with their direct supervisor, in fact, is in the top 3 reasons that millennials leave their jobs. They say they don't invest in me, they don't care about me, they don't want to build a relationship with me, and so they're ready to move on because they don't feel that who they work for actually cares about who they are. But I think Kuhn made a very important point this morning about the importance of coaching, because coaching is one of the most important ways that you're going to engage with millennials. Because the reality is that millennials don't want to be managed. We want to be coached. There's a difference between managing, mentoring, and coaching. Really quickly, managing is giving them a task of something to do. Do this, by then, or else, right? Coaching is helping them kind of create a better environment and keeping them accountable, right? It's coming alongside. When you're a coach, you're helping them along the way. And a mentor is someone who's going to give advice, someone who's going to give you a little bit more direction. So really, millennials are looking for those mentors and their coaches, but they don't necessarily want you to, tick off things that they need to do or else. They want you to be doing life with them. They want to have that organic relationship as well. This is interesting. Millennials, back to that Harvard Business Review study, we found very important points of what they actually see as respectable in their managers. And the number one thing that they said was having technical expertise. This is fascinating because millennials then want to know that you're good at your job, right? If you're not good at your job, if you're not holding your water, being the manager and being the leader, then they're not going to listen to you. So that is important for you to keep in mind, that you have to be excellent first and then call out excellence in them. Then they also want to know that you do want to have that consistent relationship with them, and that you have a team-oriented perspective when actually leading the organization that you're a part of. The next myth is that millennials are disloyal. Now, it's fascinating. Here in the EU, millennials will actually have 14 different jobs by the time they turn 38. 14 different jobs. That averages about a job every 1 to 2 years. So for any of you who are in HR, you're probably not that excited about hiring millennials, right? Because it costs, what, about 100 to 150% of someone's salary to replace them. That's very expensive if you think about it, that you're replacing millennials every 1 to 2 years. And so companies I work with are just saying, well, why do I need to deal with these people if they keep quitting? But the reality is that millennials are quitting because they're not having those quality relationships. Millennials aren't going to do what maybe you did, 40 years ago, or even generations before you, where you went in and you got a job and you stayed at that job the rest of your life, right? That was something that we experienced in days of old. Now, I talk to millennials and I'm like, yeah, you can stay at this job for 15 years. And they're like curled up in a little ball, like, don't make me do it. That sounds terrible, right? Because millennials want to change. We want to move and we want to grow. So how can you keep millennials longer is that you realize that they want to invest in the people around them. Millennials want to feel like they've got family at work. They want to build those quality relationships. I remember I had a fantastic manager, one of my first jobs out of college, and it was not the job that I wanted, right? I thought I was a consultant, which no one knows what that means, right? So I remember going to getting my first job, and I bought this suit, and I had a little suitcase, and I just walked in. I thought I was all professional, and I thought I was going to be consulting major big clients. I was going to be on conference calls and traveling the world. And they gave me a little corner office that used to be a broom closet that they converted for me. And so like there were a lot of like, it was very smelly, there was like a lot of bleach and probably affected my mental capacity. But I remember my boss pulling me in because I just got so discouraged. I said, this is not the job that I wanted, right? I was like, had all these ideas of how I was going to decorate my office, and it was just, you know, a little tiny closet. And I was making cold calls. I just was calling people I didn't even know and trying to sell them things. And my manager did the most important thing that a manager has ever done for me. And I want you to listen to this. He pulled me into his office, and he sat me down, and he said, Gabrielle, I want to tell you how much I appreciate your contribution. He said, I know this is not what you thought it was going to be. I know this isn't sexy. It's not really even what we talked about in the job interview. But I want to tell you this. You doing your job makes every other person in this company do their job better. And I just want to let you know that you are making a big difference in this company, and I appreciate your work. That was it. It took 15 seconds of his time, but you better believe that I was incredibly committed to that man and to that company because he saw who I was. He saw my contribution. He saw what I did mattered. And I went from there, and I was like making the best cold calls ever, right? I just was so passionate and so excited because he saw who I was. And that was the most important gift that that manager or any manager could give to me. The fourth myth is that millennials are addicted to technology. Now, it's probably not a myth, right? How many of you would also say you are addicted to technology, right? 65% of millennials actually admitted to sleeping with their cell phone in bed with them, like cuddled up with them. I have one millennial, she's in college, and she has like a special pillow for her phone because heaven forbid someone call her in the middle of the night and she needs to pick up her phone, right? So as a society, we're becoming more and more addicted to technology. But it's interesting because millennials actually think that technology is going to solve everything. And I think many of us in this room have a very heightened appreciation for technology. It's so important. But for you, maybe growing up, technology was a form of efficiency. Like I use my smartphone or my tablet, my computer to get things done faster. For millennials, technology is a sign of their identity. Millennials now use technology to communicate. I mean, apparently you can make phone calls from it, but that's where all my photos are, my emails. You know, I use it for Apple Pay to pay for things. Everything is now housed on our phones, and technology is now how we build relationships with people as well. And so for us, when you're looking and working with millennials, maybe some of them might be pulling up their phones and they might be texting or they might be, you know, doing something. And I see some of you doing that right now, where you've got your phones out and you're doing this, and to the world it might look like you're, you know, playing like Candy Crush or like some other sort of game on your like Farmville or, you know, whatever the newest game is right now that everybody's playing. But you could be, you know, sending an email to a client, or you could be taking notes in the meeting. And so I coach millennials and I help them explain that. I say, if you take out any of your smart devices, you look disrespectful if you just are out there, you know, doing your thing. Explain to them what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. Because if not, it looks like you're not present. So helping millennials understand how things come across as well. The reality is that millennials aren't necessarily addicted to the device itself, but we're addicted to being connected. Like I said, we're the first digital native generation because we're so used to having technology. I call my phone my phantom limb. It's like we're constantly connected to it at all times because that's my portal to the world. That's how I stay connected to my friends and to my family and to know what's going on in my community. The fifth and final myth is that millennials are unmotivated. I get it all the time. It doesn't matter. Have you asked them what it would take for them to work harder? So oftentimes we kind of look at the next generation and we think, I gave them everything that I thought that they wanted. Millennials want to show up and contribute to the team, but that also means that they want to show up and contribute to the job description as well. They want to have a unique say in what it is that they can actually do. As I discussed before, yes, millennials are incredibly mission-oriented. We want to know what we do, like my manager telling me, Gabrielle, what you do makes a difference in this organization. to your point, here we've got a couple of, for those of you who can't see out there, we've got a couple of different national studies here that shows what are some of the priorities of millennials across the country. Across the globe. So we're looking here at Central and Eastern Europe, which I think is fascinating, because what we find here is their priorities that they want to grow and learn new things. Secondly, it shows that they actually want to spend time with their family. Those are the priorities that they're saying that they actually care about at work. And then the third is that they want to live a long and healthy life. Now, this probably doesn't sound very different than any of you, nor should it, because we all have more in common than we could possibly have that's not in common. But it just looks differently. So when you're working with millennials, and really if you're working with anybody, understanding what uniquely motivates them, put the ball back in their court. Customize a job description based off of the unique flexibility, priorities, ideas for success that your employees have, no matter their age. So how can we actually engage with millennials? For those of you who are taking notes, I would very much encourage you to write down these things or take a picture of it, of the top 10 things every company must know. As I said, I work with companies across the globe to help them engage with their millennials, and these are the 10 fundamental pillars that you must have, no matter your position, to be engaging with millennials. If this is something of interest of you, I encourage you to come and speak to me afterwards. I would love to work with you and your team to be able to understand how you can customize this to you and your team and your unique conditions. The first, like I said, mission-driven. We want to know what we do makes a difference. Next is work-life balance. I work on universities across the country in the United States, and it's fascinating. Work-life balance is one of the top things that millennials ask me. What about work-life balance? And I'm like, okay, do you know what work-life balance is? And no, right? Because no one really does, because it's something completely unique to who you are. What we're finding, and it's not work-life balance. We won't even talk about it. That's a fallacy. It's work-life integration. We live in a world now where everything is kind of mixed together, and so you have to define it for yourself. You have to own what kind of life you want to live, and that goes back to that fulfillment component. Leadership opportunities, particularly here in this part of the world, they want to know that they are identified as a leader, that they've got a say. Because if you give someone something to own, they're instantly more loyal to you because they know that they've got to show up, right? They've got to be held accountable. For those of you who were given this scenario of what to do with this millennial, what was powerful was those of you who said, I would let them go, but realize that that they're responsible for this at the end of the day. Empower them with it. But then you also have to keep in mind that they might fail the first 1 or 2 times. You have to be okay with that, to give them a little bit of a longer starting round than you might have necessarily thought. Travel is incredibly important to millennials. They want to go and experience the world. Flexibility. We're going to be talking a little bit about how millennials are changing the work environment because we're so used to having a flexible scenario. Many of us are even going to college online. And so the idea of having to actually go into a physical work world is very foreign to us. We just think, why can't I just, if I'm going to be sitting on my laptop, why don't I just be sitting on my laptop at home, right? There's not much difference there. Recognition is incredibly important. Empowerment. Security. This is interesting. For millennials, although we want to job hop and we want opportunity in front of us, we're also terrified that the job that we have now isn't going to still be there for us. So helping a millennial stay committed to your company by showing that you have a vested interest in them, that you see them to be a success in the long term. Saying, I see you with this company 10 and 15 years, and guess what? I want to help you get there. That's what it means to build security within your team. Creativity. Give them a way for them to express themselves. Do they have a unique work environment that shows their own personal style and passion? And finally, support. They want to know that their direct supervisor has got their back. They don't want to be fighting with those that are in complete management. But I want to just give you a little something extra. For those of you who have millennials that you want them to quit, I thought that I would include a couple of different pointers of how you can actually get them to leave. So, you got a millennial and you want them to leave. Micromanage them. Tell them exactly what to do, how to do it, maybe stand over them and like breathe very heavy and, you know, check in with them every 20 to 30 minutes to see if they've done it right. They'll quit. Give them no feedback, right? Just don't ever tell them how they're doing, better or worse. They'll quit. Static job tasks. Give them the same thing to do over and over again. And what's even more annoying for millennials is don't tell them why. It's interesting, millennials are also called Generation Y. We're also called the Me generation or Echo Boomers. But we're not just called Generation Y because we're the generation after X. We're Generation Y because we want to know why. And so explaining to them first why, then what, then how. So millennials are changing the way that we work. Our physical work environments are completely changing. We don't necessarily want to go into an office anymore. We want the office to come home with us. Also, too, millennials want to have more collaborative workspaces where we can work together. Over half of millennials in Europe, a study was done by Xerox. They said that they do not have a work environment that fosters creativity and collaboration. Create small groups where people can actually work together. They're changing the way that management and leadership styles are. We want it very flat. We want to have access to leadership even at younger ages. We want to have a customized job role. We want to uniquely be contributing to the company. Maybe that looks like giving them the opportunity to define their own job title or give them a unique role that's completely important to them, rather than just saying you're employee 1,497. We want to know that I'm Gabrielle Jackson and what I actually do today makes a difference. And finally, disrupting the process. Telling a millennial that it's just the way it's always been done is one of the most frustrating responses that millennials can have. Because we want to know why. We want to know why can't it be better? Why can't it be faster? Why can't we do a more efficient job? So again, I'm going to give you 3 choices. You can either ignore millennials, tolerate millennials, or I would encourage you to engage with the millennial generation, because I guarantee you that as soon as you take that step to build relationships with the next generation, it will come back as an investment tenfold in the near future. Thank you. I was also going to say, so I'm going to be selling my books. I'll be outside. I know we need to go on to the next round. But also, too, for each of you, I did want to provide something for free. So my books are $10. They're US dollars, and I only take Square. You can also find it online on Amazon.com. But very quickly, if you want to write this down, this is a free workbook that I've given to all of you. You can go and download. It's millennialsolution.com/free. Millennialsolution.com/free, and it's a free 7-step guide on how to engage with millennials that I have provided for each of you for free today. So thank you very much. If you have questions, you can meet me outside.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I found it out that I'm actually a millennial. I didn't know that.
It's okay. We'll work on counseling later so you can,
thank you.
deal with it.
Yeah. So you will be with us at the cocktail party at 7, so everybody who wants to talk with Gabrielle or maybe buy a book.
Yes, please do. Talk with me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Mi u biti imamo problem sa millennialsima u Hrvatskoj, a to je uglavnom da su nezaposleni.